Hello guys, my name is Anna, I'm from Ukraine and I vlog daily to keep you updated on the real-life situation in my country during this awful war with Russia, but together with the world we will win, and I want you to know the steps that we take to achieve this victory sooner. Once again, I'm really grateful for your subscription, your attention and your support that you demonstrate to my country, Ukraine. And today I felt like I want to explain you two very important processes that are taking place in Ukraine, and these are decommunization and derussification. I have mentioned them in a couple of my videos. Maybe you have come across these ideas when reading articles about modern history and reforms in Ukraine, but a teacher inside of me wants to explain them in detail. Well, first of all, you have to understand, and I hope that the world now sees it very quickly and very clearly. I wanted to say that Ukraine is not Russia. Ukraine was not Russia, and there is a huge difference between Ukraine and Russia, starting from our history, language, cultural identity, and finishing with some basic character traits that always make Ukrainians search for freedom, independence, and make Russian country choose new dictators, experience fear and spread misery. So we were occupied by Russian Empire, a part of Ukraine, for 300 years. Then we had a very short spell of independence known as Ukrainian People's Republic, and even though these were like 3-4 years, they were very, very important for the strengthening of Ukrainian spirit. And then we had like decades of Soviet occupation. So the very important thing that you have to understand, Ukrainians do not identify themselves as Russians. These are two different nations and two different histories and two different kinds of consciousness, it seems to me. Russians call everyone a Nazi if a person does not want to speak Russian, does not say that Russians are the best, or were once occupied by Russia but now identifies himself or herself as non-Russian, which actually makes Russian Nazis or Russists or whatever term you choose. During these long years of occupation, Russia tried to leave its traces everywhere. So one of the first and very important laws that were passed after the victory of the Revolution of Dignity back in 2015 was the law on decommunization. What is that? On the territory of Ukraine, there were lots of monuments to communist leaders. There were lots of streets named after them. There were lots of cities named after them. And it was especially visible for foreigners who come to Ukraine and see lots of Lenins, for example. Many people were ignoring these monuments, like many city councils did not have enough time. There was they did not feel 100% the wars that started in 2014. Maybe some were still intoxicated by the nostalgia, when the process started, it was extremely important for the return of Ukrainian cultural identity and also for the persecution of the totalitarian communist regime, because we all know the countries who were under communists suffered a lot. Millions of victims of this regime. Genocides like Holodomor, executions, terror, arrests, Russification, destroying churches, important institutions, private property, totally perverting, the plan of a country to develop. So communist regime was a totalitarian regime. It is a regime that led to a huge number of victims that can be equated to the Nazi regime in Germany, and Stalin is no better than Hitler. So it goes without saying that any country should not glorify communist Soviet regime. That's why lots of their symbols disappeared from the buildings. The names of the communist leaders disappeared from our streets, and it is a huge victory. And what is even more pathetic and tragic, what was pathetic and tragic, that some cities or some streets were named after those communists who were responsible, for example, for Holodomor. Imagine how absurd that is. Then almost every Ukrainian city and village had the street of Lenin, and that was a central street. Now in Ukraine, you will always come across the streets like Shevchenko, who is our main poet, or Voli, which is freedom. But Lenin Street was obligatory even in small villages. And there were even jokes like, if you live on the Lenin Street, then you live in the center, because all the best streets prospects were given to communist leaders. I also think it's pretty stupid when the city is named after a political leader, and there were many of such in Ukraine. They were renamed at the beginning of the Soviet era and glorified those Bolsheviks, those communists who were actually responsible for executions, arrests of many Ukrainian people. So you see how absurd that is. Plus, even if we forget about this totalitarian past, about this negativity, about the victims of the regime, it has no cultural connection, historical connection with the cities. And you cannot explain why do you have Lenin in a small village in my city. Now, he does not stand there, but it is so very important and so very symbolic, because in those towns that were temporarily occupied by Russian orcs during this war, the first thing they did, they were looking for these graveyards of monuments or museums of communism, totalitarian regime that we now have, and they quickly returned these monuments back. So in Russia, there is no more a communist state that says it's not the Soviet Union anymore. Lenins are everywhere. And when they come and occupy new territory and want to renew its empire status, what do? They revive Lenin. I'm not even speaking about the fact that they still have his mummy in the center of Moscow, near Kremlin. This is very weird. Sometimes I think we should record a Soviet myth debunk video just about the mummy of Lenin, because it's extra weird for me, same as long queues of people who want to see that dead body. So, decommunization is a successful process, and it took place not only in Ukraine, in Poland, in other countries that were either occupied by communists or influenced very much by these regimes. And this is very important. It is not fighting against your history or forgetting your history. It's fighting against the totalitarian regime that was responsible for killings of millions. And I have one request: in future, when you visit Kyiv, when it is safe to come, and other places of Ukraine, don't look for this, I don't want to use bad words, bad Soviet souvenirs, like fur hats, like matryoshkas, like Lenin, like various badges from communist times. Don't do that. Do not spend your money on that stuff that killed millions. It's just the same as trying to buy Hitler's portrait in Berlin. I don't think it's a normal idea. It's a wise idea, so don't do and don't ask for similar things in Ukraine. Another process that was a little bit underestimated and takes place right now is the process of derussification. We have a separate video in our Soviet myths debunked, and perhaps I will link it to this vlog, where we talk about the process of Russification in Soviet Union. But this was a very active process, and for decades after the declaration of independence of Ukraine, we still had lots of streets, lots of institutions named by Russian national heroes that had nothing to do with Ukraine. So this is not, once again, example of Nazism. We don't burn books, we don't destroy monuments that are neutral or have nothing to do with war against Ukraine. But when we talk about the heroes of Russian nationalism, of Russian Nazism, of Russian chauvinism, it goes without saying that they should not be present in Ukraine, because Hundreds of Ukrainians die daily. Once again, why? Because Russia decided to attack us, a free and independent, beautiful country. So this derussification took place everywhere because we have one state language, and there were lots of documents that were still prepared in Russian language, especially during the Yanukovych regime, who was a Russian figure, Russian-funded president. Also, there were lots of streets named by Russian painters, Russian poets, not Ukrainian. And most importantly, none of these people visited Ukraine. None of these people wrote about Ukraine. None of these people liked Ukraine. And on countries like, okay, it's possible to have them if you had like French, English also, but no, these were mainly Russian heroes. And so a typical like center of the Ukrainian city at the beginning of 90s or 2000s would look like the central street of Lenin, then the central street close to it of Pushkin, who is the national poet of Russia, and so on and so forth. Personally, I am a great supporter of the idea that we don't have to run after famous, like super famous names, even Ukrainian names. And maybe it is really good when the names of streets, they are not political posters, and when they tell you more about the history of that city, about the specialties of that city, maybe geographical, I don't know, climate, cultural or something like that. I'm a great supporter of that. And for example, I live on one of the streets that is named after a Russian literary person, and I want my street to change its name, and the process is going on. And I want it to be changed for, not for a Ukrainian hero, because we're not Nazis in Ukraine, but for a Lithuanian hero, Prince Vytautas, who spent in Lutsk much time, and he was the organizer of the very important Congress of European Monarchs, and he spent much time in Lubert's Castle, and he was very active in this proto-EU style of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. I think it would be nice that one of the central streets of Lutsk to be named after this Lithuanian historical figure that was very important for the positive history of my region. Then it looks nice. So these processes of derussification and decommunization are very active. During the Revolution of Dignity, we had something that was called like Lenino Fall or something, Lenin's Fall, if it's possible to say. Many Lenins disappeared in the east of Ukraine because in the west of Ukraine, they disappeared long before that. And nowadays, Putin achieved just the contrary of what he wanted. There were many people who were Russia neutral, who believed that Russia is our big brother, just like in Orwell's works. But now they see its true face, and those who were supporters now totally understand how ugly Putin's regime is and how dangerous Russian support and friendship is. That's why they switched to Ukrainian language. They start supporting renaming of cities and streets, and the disappearance of the monuments to people who were actually killers of the Ukrainian cultural identity and Ukrainian people in general. Let me know, especially those of you who lived in pro-socialist countries, do similar processes take place or took place in your countries. Thank you once again for your support. Thank you for buying me coffees, becoming my patrons, and most importantly for the support that you demonstrate to my country, Ukraine. Thank you so much. Slava Ukraini!